Hey guys, tonight we begin with a question that sounds almost too simple until you realize the answer is genuinely strange. What actually happened to the aristocratic families of Rome after Rome fell? We're talking about the late 5th century, specifically Italy around 490 AD, when a Gothic king named Theodoric has just taken over the peninsula, and the last Western Roman emperor has been gone for about 14 years. The Senate still meets, the old families are still in their old houses, and somehow, improbably, the paperwork is still getting done. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So let's set the scene. It is the 4th of September, 476 AD. A Gothic warlord named Odoacer has just deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a teenager named Romulus Augustulus, which sounds completely made up but wasn't. And the remarkable thing about this world, historical moment, basically nothing happened. No screaming, no fire, no dramatic charge through the Senate doors. The sun came up the next morning, the grain ships docked, the senators went to their meetings, the empire was gone, but Rome was still there, still full of marble columns and traffic, and ancient senatorial families who had been powerful since before Julius Caesar was anyone's problem. Here is what nobody tells you about the fall of Rome. It wasn't an explosion. It was more like a slow corporate restructuring. The staff stayed. The offices stayed. The job title stayed. The only thing that changed was the name on the top executive's door. First it said Odoacer. Then, in 493 AD, it said Theodoric, a Gothic king, half raised at the Byzantine court, fluent enough in Roman political culture to know exactly which levers to pull. He walked into Italy and essentially said, "I love what you've done with the place. Keep doing it. I just need some of your best people to help me run things." And the Roman aristocracy, the senators, the landowners, the families with names going back 4 and 5 centuries, had exactly one decision to make: collaborate, retreat, or disappear. Most of them collaborated. And the story of how they did that, what it cost them, and what it meant for everything that came after. That is what we're doing tonight. Congratulations, you've just woken up as a Roman senator in Rome, 490 AD. The good news, you are still rich. The bad news, the empire is gone. A Gothic king is in the palace, and it is Tuesday, which means Senate. Your bedroom is cool. The thick stone walls holding the October chill, well past dawn, and the air reaches you carrying beeswax from the lamp your slave lit an hour ago, old plaster, and the faint residue of yesterday's dinner still working its way out of the kitchen below. Your mattress is stuffed wool. Your family stopped using the cheaper straw, filling 3 generations back, and it has the warm, compressed smell of fabric that has been heated by your body through the night, the particular comfort of something entirely familiar. Your slave is in the doorway waiting. Your other 2 are visible in the inner courtyard beyond, already beginning the morning's work. You hear this before you see it. You are not, at this particular moment, ready. You have never in your adult life been ready at this hour, and the hour has never once in your memory adjusted itself on your behalf. You wash your face in the ceramic basin. The water is cold, drawn from your cistern before sunrise, and it hits your skin with the kind of focused unpleasantness that passes, in the absence of hot water infrastructure on this floor of your house, for being awake. You dress in stages, attended by your slave. Outside, your city is assembling itself. The low grind of cartwheels on stone that your window lets in. A vendor somewhere in the street below, calling in the voice of someone who has been shouting the same phrase since before your neighborhood woke up. A dog making its professional opinion known about something 2 alleys over. These are the sounds you have known since childhood, the sounds of Rome, in the morning, as long as you can remember. Except that if you listen carefully, you notice something layered underneath the familiar Latin cadences, Gothic words, spoken at volume, the rhythm of a language your city has not yet decided how to process. Your new neighbours have been here a few years now. You have mostly stopped noticing. You have not entirely stopped noticing. Here is what is remarkable about your situation. Remarkable in a way the history books tend to skip over. Out of approximately 240 administrative officials currently running the civil government of Italy, the people managing tax collection, road maintenance, grain distribution, and the 1,000 other functions that keep a civilization from reverting to organized chaos. About 190 of them have Roman names. Roman men, doing Roman jobs, under a Gothic king who issues his edicts in Latin, and whose chief secretary, a man named Cassiodorus, writes official government correspondence in a classical prose style, more correct than many of the emperors he has effectively replaced. The Senate still meets, the actual Senate, the one that has been gathering in one form or another since 509 BC. The consulship still exists. Men are still appointed as consuls every year. Their names still used to date official documents, the same way they've been dated for 5 centuries. The machinery of Roman civilization is entirely intact. The only thing missing is the empire that was supposed to be powering it. And yet, here it is, running. You step into the street and the city opens around you. The smell of bakeries already running, charcoal and hot grain, and the yeasty sweetness of bread your neighbour's kitchen is producing. The smell of the city's morning breath, which is as it has always been for your entire life. A combination of cooking fires and wet stone, and the particular organic richness of a place that has been continuously inhabited for over 1,000 years. If the wind is wrong, you also get the drainage channel 2 streets west, which your district's Gothic count has been promising to have cleared since spring, and which remains, at present, a work in progress. But there is also the smell of laurel from a garden wall you pass every morning, and something still flowering in a sheltered courtyard, whose household you don't know personally, but whose garden you have quietly appreciated for years, and the cold metallic edge of an October sky that is just beginning to lighten from grey into something more forgiving. Ahead of you, past the columns of the Forum, is the Curia, the Senate House. It has been there your entire life. Tonight you bring us inside. Your name is not simple. Yours never has been. Roman aristocratic naming conventions are a monument to the idea that your entire political ancestry should be readable at a glance. Your praenomen, the first name that almost nobody uses in formal contexts. Your nomen, the family name that connects you to your gens, your clan, your centuries of accumulated obligation. And then your cognomens, the additional names that pile on like endorsements, each one commemorating an ancestor of yours, an office your family held, a victory your line once won, a strategic marriage your great, something grandmother carefully negotiated. Your full name, written out, is an itinerary. It tells anyone who reads it exactly where your family has been, politically speaking, for the last 4 centuries. The inscription above your family's tomb outside the city runs to 3 full lines of carved stone. Your son once asked you what all the words meant. You explained for 40 minutes, and he fell asleep while you were still on the first cognomen. You considered this, in retrospect, entirely appropriate. Your townhouse on the Caelian Hill has been in your family for 5 generations, which in Rome means it has been rebuilt twice, extended once, and repaired so many times that the original structure underneath is essentially archaeological. Foundations and load, bearing walls that predate everything your family has stacked on top of them over the decades. Your atrium floor is the original mosaic, black and white tesserae in the geometric pattern fashionable during Hadrian's reign, and now so old it reads as both antique and inevitable. The way old things do when they have been in the same place long enough to become part of your house's identity, rather than merely its decoration. Your walls are thick stone, cool even in summer, holding the temperature of the season before the one you are currently in. Your lararium, your household shrine, tucked in its corner of the atrium, holds the small bronze figures your great-grandfather's generation commissioned, worn smooth where hands have touched them during morning prayers for so long that the faces have gone soft, gods made more abstract the longer your family has worshipped them. Here is the thing people miss about Roman aristocracy. Being noble wasn't just about owning land. Plenty of people owned land. The real defining feature, the thing that separated a senatorial family from merely a very wealthy one, was its relationship to the state. The cursus honorum, literally the course of honours, was the required sequence of public offices that defined a legitimate political career. Quaestor first, then aedile, then praetor. Then, if you had the connections and the talent, consul. You were expected to serve. You were expected to be useful to the public in a documented, official, measurable way. A senatorial family that retreated from this, that sat quietly on its estates, refusing appointments, declining the Senate summons, was not considered nobly retired. It was considered to have failed. To be a Roman aristocrat was to be, by definition, in service to the state. That was the arrangement. Your family had been holding up their end of this arrangement in an unbroken line since before the empire existed. Your library is off the tablinum, your main reception room, and it occupies what was once a spare bedroom and is now floor to ceiling, shelving holding roughly 300 scroll cases and another 100 codices. The newer book format that your father's generation considered slightly undignified and that you use because it is simply more practical. Your shelving is cedar, and it holds the layered smell of cedar, and old papyrus, and the olive oil you use to keep your scrolls flexible. An animal, fat undertone so familiar to you that you only notice it when someone who hasn't grown up around books makes a comment about it. The scrolls you read regularly are warm and slightly tacky to your touch in summer, cool and firm in winter. The way old organic materials develop their own relationship with the seasons after your hands have handled them long enough. On the shelf nearest your window, in their own case with a bronze latch, are your Cicero, your Virgil, your Livy. The three texts you were required to memorize portions of as a child. You could still recite significant passages from each, if asked. Nobody asks you anymore. In your atrium, between your columns, are the Imagines, 14 ancestral portrait busts, each in its own alcove, each labelled with a small bronze plaque bearing the name and offices of the man depicted. The oldest one, at the far left, has been cleaned and handled so many times across so many generations of your family that the face has gone soft, the features worn into something more symbol than portrait, the concept of a Roman ancestor, rather than a specific man who ate your household's food and held your family's opinions. The newest, third from the right, was carved 40 years ago, and still has the brightness of relatively recent marble, the crisp lines of a face that someone who actually knew your grandfather sat down to record from life. You walk past these every morning on your way to the tablinum. You have walked past these every morning since you were 5 years old. They are the wallpaper of your inheritance, so constant and so entirely a part of your house's atmosphere that you stopped seeing them years ago. Some mornings, though, a particular angle of autumn light catches the oldest face, and you stop. The education system was not optional, and this is where things get interesting in a way that will become very relevant soon. Every male child from a senatorial family went through the same program: Latin rhetoric, Greek philosophy, Roman law, mathematics, public speaking, formal debate. Not because all of these subjects were practically useful, some of them weren't really, but because the process of learning them was the marker. You could tell within 10 minutes of conversation whether someone had been properly educated in the Roman manner, and if they had, you knew they were one of you. The system had been producing this result reliably for 5 centuries. Fathers sent sons to tutors. Tutors sent them to grammarians. Grammarians sent them to rhetoricians. Rhetoricians sent them into public life. The endpoint was not a certificate. Rome didn't do certificates. The endpoint was a position. You became, through this process, someone the state could use. And the state, for 500 years, used you. That word, used, is about to take on a considerably more complicated meaning. Your estate in Campania is 300 acres of good river, fed farmland producing grain and wine and oil in quantities. Your estate manager can tell you exactly, and that you could tell him approximately if you checked the accounts, which you do twice a year and which takes a full day each time. Your villa is 2 stories, built by an ancestor of yours in the previous century, whose taste ran to red-painted walls and marble threshold, stones, and a heated bathing suite that was impressive 50 years ago, and is now merely functional. Your fields smell, this time of year, of turned earth and drying grass, and the mineral cold of irrigation channels that run low in October. Your stone walls above the waterline, going pale with dried deposits that your workers will clean in spring. Your lane from the main road to the villa is flanked by old plane trees, enormous, their bark that characteristic pale grey and cream you have known since childhood, peeling in the way plane trees peel, the way they have been peeling your whole life without ever visibly diminishing. The land feeds you. The land has always fed your family. The land is the one thing that does not change hands when empires change management. Your slave arranges your toga with the practiced efficiency of someone who has performed this service every morning for 7 years, pulling the fabric into its required configuration, checking the drape at your shoulder, adjusting the fall at your left arm with 2 fingers and a small tug. The wool is heavy and already warm where it contacts your neck, and it carries the smell of the cedar chest where it lives when it is not on your body. And beneath that, the faint lanolin smell that all Roman wool holds regardless of how many times your household has had it cleaned. Your toga has not meaningfully changed in design since the Republic. You are aware of the reasons, the tradition, the deliberate conservatism of your class, the comfort of continuity. You are also aware of the practical function. Your toga is a performance, one that announces your rank, your status, your membership in a specific category of person. Before you have said a single word, you check your reflection in the bronze mirror on your wall. You look like a Roman senator. This is, at this particular moment in history, a statement carrying considerably more political weight than it might appear to carry. Now here is the distinction that nobody in 490 AD is discussing out loud, but that will prove, over the next 50 years, to be the most important division in the history of your class. Not all Roman aristocrats were the same kind of Roman aristocrat. At the very top were the trans-regional families, the Anisi, the Samaki, the Deci dynasties, with estates in multiple provinces, clients and political alliances, spread from Britain to North Africa. Families who had been producing consuls for so long that the Senate essentially organized itself around their expectations. Their wealth and power operated at the scale of the empire itself. Below them, but still entirely senatorial, were the regional landowners, families important in their specific cities, powerful in their districts, rooted in particular places. The difference seemed irrelevant when the empire was running. It is about to stop being irrelevant. The transregional great families, the ones whose position depended on the imperial network holding the whole world together. Most of them will not make it through the century. The regional landowners, the ones with their roots in specific soil, will largely survive. Smaller, more provincial, less impressive on paper, but alive. Still on the land. Your lamp in the tablinum is burning low. You refill it from the flask on your shelf. The smell of olive oil sharp and clean in the early morning air of your house. Outside your windows, Rome continues its slow morning assembly. Carts on the stone streets, vendors beginning their rounds. The distant sound of hammering somewhere in the city that never quite stops its perpetual reconstruction of itself. Your secretary appears in your doorway with the morning correspondence, a note from your estate manager about the autumn harvest numbers, a formal communication from the Gothic Count, who oversees your district's military administration, and who has, for the third time this month, requested a meeting at a time that directly conflicts with your Senate session. Your name is on both documents. The Roman name, the long name, the name that tells its reader where your family has been for 4 centuries. You note the conflict. You will resolve it the way you resolve everything these days, with careful navigation, with the patience of a man who has accepted that 2 incompatible worlds now both require your presence, and with the particular Roman quality that has kept your family functional through 3 changes of government and 1 catastrophic change of empire. You take the letters. You take your toga. You are going back, not to this morning, not to your bedroom in 490, your Gothic Count's letter, your careful Tuesday navigation, but 14 years earlier. You are younger. Your father is still alive. Your name is on the rolls, but not yet attached to the offices you will later hold. You wake up in the same house, the same bedroom, the same wool mattress in the same stone walls that hold the same October chill. And something in the city sounds different this morning. Not louder, not more violent, just different. A quality of held breath in the sounds coming through your window that you noticed before you are noticing. Your lamp is burning. The kitchen smell is already rising through your house. You get up. You dress in the ordinary way, attended by your slave in the ordinary way. And your household is running in its ordinary rhythm. Your cook working, your secretary organizing the morning's correspondence on the writing table. Your father's footsteps in the upper corridor, meaning he has already been awake for an hour. Already thinking about whatever he has been thinking about since before you were born. But there are voices in your atrium, not guests. It is too early for your guests. Your family's clients, perhaps, the men who come every morning to present themselves and collect the small favours and acknowledgements that make up the daily social economy of your class. Except there are more of them than you would expect, and their voices carry the particular quality you have learned to recognise over years of living in this house, people who have heard something and are waiting to hear more. You go down, you stand at the edge of your atrium and listen. Here is what was happening that morning outside your walls and across the city. A Gothic military commander named Odoacer, who had been running the Western Roman army for effectively no one in particular, since there had been no emperor worth the title for several years, had reached the end of his patience with the paperwork involved in pretending otherwise. The current emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was approximately 16 years old, installed on the throne by his own father, who was the actual power behind the arrangement and who had himself just been killed. Odoacer sent him a message. The message was, in essence, abdicate. Romulus did. He was sent to a comfortable villa in Campania, roughly the same region as your own family's estate, given a pension, and thereafter largely ignored. The Western imperial insignia was packed up and dispatched to Constantinople to the Eastern Emperor Zeno, with a polite accompanying note explaining that the West no longer required its own emperor, because Odoacer would be handling things from here. This is what the fall of the Roman Empire looked like from the administrative side. A resignation letter, a forwarded package, a pension. The news reaches your household by mid-morning, carried by one of your father's contacts, who has connections near the Senate, the way news in Rome has always travelled, through the layered network of clients and friends and men. Who now? Men that constitutes the infrastructure of your class. Your father receives it in the tablinum, standing at his writing table, with the particular stillness of a man who has been expecting something and is now processing the specific shape it has taken. You watch his face. Your face, in response, produces nothing useful. What you hear is this: the emperor has abdicated. Odoacer is now in charge. The Senate has been informed. You are told, and your city is calm. No fighting, no invasion, no Visigoths at your gate. Your breakfast is getting cold on the table in the triclinium, and the smell of it, flatbread and oil, and the fig your cook managed to find this time of year, is absurdly the most present sensory reality in the room. Your father goes to the forum. You go with him, and here is the thing that will stay with you for the rest of your life. Rome looks exactly the same. The columns are where you left them yesterday. The temples are where they have always been for as long as you have known anything. You enter the forum, the heart of the empire, the place where the Roman world has organized itself for 1,000 years. And it is full of people doing what they always do, arguing, conducting business, walking quickly with the look of men who have somewhere to be. The stone beneath your sandals is the same stone it was yesterday, worn smooth by centuries of feet that include somewhere in the layered past every important Roman who ever lived. The smell reaches you the same as always: old stone and dust, the vague animal richness of the city, and bakeries. There are always bakeries, and they are always open. You look at it all and feel the absence of whatever you expected to feel. This should feel like something, you think. It mostly feels like Tuesday, and that is the detail the dramatic narrative of Rome's fall consistently fails to capture. Odoacer had no interest in tearing things down. He needed things to keep working, because things working was what kept his army paid, and his territory functional. The Senate still met. The consuls were still appointed. The tax collection continued. The courts held their sessions. The road maintenance continued, more or less. The civil service, overwhelmingly staffed by Roman aristocrats, who had spent entire careers learning to do exactly these things, continued doing them. Odoacer actually petitioned the Eastern Emperor Zeno to recognize him as a patrician, a Roman title, a Roman honorific, which Zeno eventually, grudgingly, did. The most dramatically visible change in the city of Rome on the 5th of September, 476 AD, as compared to the 3rd of September, was essentially nothing detectable by any of your five senses. The second most visible change was that Odoacer now signed the paperwork. The empire, it turned out, was less a living thing than a brand name, and the operations continued under new management. The Senate meets within the week. You go with your father, not yet as a senator yourself, your career still in its early stages, your first offices still ahead of you, but as the kind of young man whose family's position has always placed him at the edges of these things, watching. Your curia is the same as it has always been: the tiered seating, the ranked senators in their places, the particular quality of afternoon light that comes through the upper windows and falls across the marble floor in long angles. The smell reaches you the same as always: old wood and stone and the faint cedar, and cloth smell of togas in quantity. The particular accumulated presence of a room where important men have been sitting for a very long time. You hear the announcement made: the Western Empire has ended. The Senate around you acknowledges this. Your procedures continue. Someone near you raises a point about the grain allocation for the coming quarter. The meeting moves on, and you move with it. You walk home through a city that has just been told its empire is over and is, by all sensory evidence, unmoved. The vendors you pass are still selling. The taverns are open. You can smell them from the street, wine and cooked food, and the warm animal fug of crowded rooms. The smell of a city's appetite operating on its normal schedule. The construction on the building 3 streets from your house, which has been ongoing for so long you have stopped noticing it, is still ongoing. A child runs past you in the street, not running from anything, just running the way children run when they have somewhere to be that is not where they currently are. Your sandals on the stone, your toga in the cooling evening air. Your thoughts arriving in whatever order they choose. The empire is over. Your father has not spoken since the Senate. Your kitchen will have dinner ready. You have a letter to write before tomorrow. In the weeks and months that follow, here is what happens. The tax collectors come. The courts hold their sessions. The Senate meets on its schedule. Odoacer issues edicts and requests, most of them entirely reasonable from the perspective of a government trying to keep a large and complicated territory functional. He makes appointments. He uses Roman administrators to make those appointments work. He does not demolish temples, or rename streets, or require anyone to stop speaking Latin. He does require the Italian landowners, your class, to cede roughly 1/3 of their Italian estates, to settle his Gothic soldiers, which is the most concretely disruptive thing that happens, and which is processed through existing Roman legal frameworks, administered by Roman officials, and delivered. In the final accounting as paperwork, this is the pattern that will hold for the next several decades, through Odoacer and through what comes after Odoacer. The machinery does not stop. The machinery never stops. It just acquires new signatures at the top. That night, the 4th of September 476 AD, the night the Western Empire ended. You sit in your family's tablinum after dinner. In the lamplight your slave has adjusted, the smell of the evening meal still threading through your house. Oil and herbs, and the particular grain smell of bread that has been cooling on the kitchen counter for an hour. You write the letter you said you would write, because it still needs to be written. Your father is in his study. Your house is quiet with its ordinary evening quiet. The creak of old wood settling, the sound of your street shifting into its nighttime rhythms. The distant dog that is apparently a permanent feature of your neighborhood's acoustic landscape. Your stylus on the wax tablet makes its small scratching sound. You write. Outside your windows, Rome continues. The empire is gone, and your Rome continues. This is the first time you understand that these are not the same thing. That Rome and the empire were always 2 different projects, and that what ended today was the second of these, not the first. You file this understanding away. You will need it. Tonight, you have a letter to finish. It is 498 AD again, and you are back in the morning you woke up in at the beginning of all this. Your house on the Calian hill, your wool mattress, your lamp burning on the shelf, your slave lit before you were properly conscious. Your window is open. You opened it yourself last night, because October in Rome runs warm enough that the chill doesn't fully arrive until after midnight, and now the morning comes through it carrying the usual sounds. Cartwheels on stone, someone selling something in the direction of the forum, a dog, the distant sound of hammering that has been a permanent feature of your neighborhood's acoustic landscape since before you can remember. And then, underneath those sounds, something else. Something you have heard every morning for the last 4 years and have not entirely learned to process as ordinary. The sound of Gothic being spoken at volume, somewhere down your street, by men who are not making any particular effort to speak quietly, because there is no longer any particular reason for them to. Your neighbour 3 houses down, whose name, you have learned after 2 years of determined social effort, is something you can only approximately reproduce in Latin letters. A name with consonant combinations your Roman tongue navigates with the particular awkward grace of someone who has been trying, has a household that runs at a different pitch than yours. His family is up before dawn, which you respect in principle and find aggressive in practice. They cook different things, and the smell of it reaches your alley in the early morning. Something with more meat than you are accustomed to, something with a different fat than Roman cooking. The smell of a cuisine that has been prepared on the other side of the Danube for several centuries and has arrived fully formed in the alley behind your house. His children are large. You are aware of this in the way you are aware of it. They are simply larger than your children, the way the Gothic people tend to run larger, and they play in the alley with a volume and a physical directness that your own children have begun, you have noticed, to imitate. Your cook mentioned this last week. You are still thinking about what to do with it. Here is how Theodoric the Great, King of the Ostrogoths, ruler of Italy, the man whose political arrangements currently govern your life, arrived in your part of the world. In 488 AD, Zeno, the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, solved two problems at once with one instruction. He told Theodoric, who had been making himself useful and expensive in the Balkans, to take Italy away from Odoacer, who had also been making himself expensive, just in a less immediately useful way. Theodoric crossed the Alps with approximately 100,000 Goths, warriors, families, wagons, animals, the entire mobile nation. He fought Odoacer across several years, several battles, and eventually a siege of Ravenna that lasted 3 years and ended in 493 AD with a peace agreement and a celebratory dinner at which Theodoric personally stabbed Odoacer through the chest with his own hand, reportedly while complimenting the quality of the wine. The Ostrogoths were now in charge of Italy. Theodoric sent Constantinople a polite notification. Constantinople sent back, after some deliberation, a grudging acknowledgement. The Gothic king settled into the imperial palace at Ravenna and began issuing edicts. His Latin was functional. His edicts were reasonable. The administration continued. You were in your 20s when Theodoric's army processed through. You remember the smell of it before you saw it. Horses, thousands of them, and the particular sharp smell of an army in summer. Iron, smoke, human bodies organized for violence. Arriving on a wind from the north that reached the city before the army did. Then the sound, the ground transmitting the footfall of more feet than you have ever heard in one place. A bass note that you felt in your chest before you identified it as military movement. Then the sight of them coming through the gate. They were large. You knew this intellectually and were still unprepared. The Gothic warriors were, on average, a different physical category than the Romans you had grown up among. Taller, heavier through the shoulders, wearing their hair in arrangements your city had not previously encountered at scales, carrying weapons that your Roman military tradition acknowledged as effective and your Roman aesthetic tradition filed under barbarian. They move through your streets with the particular confidence of men who have recently won a war and have not yet been required to adopt the indoor voice of a civilian population. Rome watched from the sides of the streets. You watched from the side of the street. The city received them the way Rome has always received occupying forces, with perfect Roman courtesy and absolutely no concession of any interior attitude whatsoever. The first official communication you received from Theodoric's court came 18 months after that, routed through your Senate's normal channels, addressed by name to your family's offices, in the formal cursus honorum notation that anyone with a Roman education would recognize immediately. Your secretary brought it to you while you were in the middle of breakfast. You held it, actual papyrus, the good quality, the court seal pressed in wax at the fold. And your first reaction was the one you later felt some shame about, relief that the Latin was correct. It was more than correct. The secretary who had written it, a man named Cassiodorus, about whom you were going to hear considerably more over the following decades, wrote in a classical prose style, more careful than any document your own Senate had produced in living memory. The content was administrative, entirely reasonable, requesting your participation in a census review for your district. The seal was Gothic, the Latin was Ciceronian. You sat with these two facts for a moment, the bread cooling on the plate beside you, the wax slightly warm under your thumb, and then you wrote back. Theodoric's arrangement for governing Italy was, in retrospect, a masterpiece of political architecture produced by a man who could not write his own name. He maintained the Roman administrative structure entirely intact, Senate, consuls, tax collection, the courts, and ran the Gothic military as a separate parallel system beside it, never formally merged. Romans were administered by Roman law through Roman officials. Goths lived under Gothic customary law through Gothic military commanders. The two systems operated side by side in the same territory without being formally integrated, which created, predictably, an enormous number of situations requiring someone who understood both. Theodoric himself had spent his formative decade as a diplomatic hostage in Constantinople and had absorbed Roman court culture at a level most Roman senators would have envied. He quoted Roman philosophers from memory, patronized classical scholars, commissioned a Roman-style palace. He identified himself publicly as a Roman patrician and a Roman citizen. His own signature, however, was applied with a golden stencil cut in the shape of the word Theod, because Theodoric the Great never learned to form letters. A man who ruled by the written word could not write. His secretary signed for him every document for 33 years. The social navigation of it is what you remember most from those first years. The specific calibration required to be in the same room as a Gothic nobleman and behave with exactly the right quantity of respect. Too much was legible as mockery. Too little was dangerous in the obvious way. Your class had been performing calibrated deference for 500 years to emperors, to generals, to men whose power was recent and whose cultural confidence was uncertain, which described both the late imperial court and the Gothic court with equal precision. The Gothic nobles who had been around Theodoric long enough to absorb court protocol presented no particular challenge. It was the newer ones, the men who were clearly powerful, clearly aware that you were aware of their power, and clearly uncertain whether the Roman who was speaking to them with flawless courtesy was respecting them or managing them. You were, in fact, doing both. This is what your education had prepared you to do. This is what your family's 4 centuries of cursus honorum had been building toward. Not the specific scenario, but the underlying skill, which was occupying any given room and calibrating your behavior precisely enough that the most powerful person in it believed you were on their side. You were, for the record, broadly on their side. The alternative had not worked out well for the people who tried it. Your district's Gothic count, the military administrator who oversees your neighbourhood's security and military affairs, a man named something your Latin renders as Witiges, has been your most immediate daily interaction with the new order for 3 years now. You have had dinner at his table. He has had dinner at yours, an event that required your cook to spend 2 days sourcing the specific cut of meat that the Count apparently expected at a formal meal, a quantity of it that your cook found personally offensive, but which arrived nonetheless and was consumed in its entirety. Witiges speaks functional Latin with an accent that your inner ear files under Pannonian frontier, and which he has never bothered to refine, apparently correctly calculating that this was not necessary for his purposes. He wears Roman-style formal clothing to official events, and wears Gothic dress at all other times, which is the arrangement most Gothic nobles of his generation have settled into. Roman performance for Roman occasions, Gothic comfort for everything else. He has, over 3 years, come to trust your administrative advice on matters where Roman legal precedent is relevant. You have come to understand, with some precision, exactly which kinds of situations he will handle by himself and which ones he will bring to you. The working relationship functions. You have learned not to complain about the drain, the pattern that has emerged, the one that nobody is discussing in the Senate, but that everyone is living, is something that a philosopher might call structural collaboration, and that you would call surviving. The Roman families who understood that Theodoric needed them continued to receive senatorial appointments, continued to manage civil administration, continued to hold the social and economic positions their families had occupied for generations. The Roman families who retreated, who declined appointments, who reduced their Senate attendance, who visibly withheld their participation from the new regime on the grounds that serving a Gothic king was beneath their dignity, discovered, within a decade, that their dignity was not, in fact, the operating currency it had formerly been. Dignity requires an infrastructure of deference, and the infrastructure had new management. What remained operative was expertise, the ability to read Latin law, navigate Roman administrative procedure, write a document that a court of any nationality could process. Your class had been producing this expertise for 5 centuries. Theodoric needed it to run a territory that stretched from the Alps to Sicily. You had a family to feed, estates to maintain, and clients who depended on your continued access to power. The transaction was, when you stripped away the philosophical complications, quite simple. Tonight you are in your tablinum, the lamp adjusted, the wax tablet warming slightly under your hands, in the way wax does when you have been working it for an hour and the lamplight has reached it from the side. You are drafting a letter on behalf of a client, a smaller landowner in your district whose property boundary dispute requires you to cite both Roman land law and the terms of the Gothic settlement arrangement that superseded it in the relevant county, and who has come to you because you are one of approximately 6 people in this part of Italy who can do that citation accurately. Your stylus makes its small sound. Your house is quiet in the way it is quiet in the evening, the creak of settling stone, the distant sound of your city negotiating its nighttime, and underneath it, from the direction of your neighbour's house, 3 doors down, the low sound of Gothic being spoken at a register that means someone is telling a story. The rhythm of a language you have been hearing for 4 years and cannot quite follow, but have begun to pass for emotional tone. Whoever is in that room is pleased about something. You return to your letter, which is in Latin, which is the language the court requires, which is the language your expertise inhabits. Outside your window, your city speaks 2 languages now. You, it turns out, needed to speak both. The route to the Curia takes you past the forum's western edge. Down the street your family has walked every Senate day for 4 generations. Your sandals on stone, that has been worn by sandals like yours since before your great-grandfather was a consideration. Your toga is adjusted. Your secretary is 2 steps behind you carrying the morning's documents in their leather case. The soft slap of it, audible in the early morning, when the street traffic hasn't yet built to its full daily volume. You pass the bakery whose owner has been in the same doorway since before Odoacer, before Theodoric, before either of the political transitions that have reorganized the world above his head. He is there now, as he is always there, his apron flowery, the smell of his shop reaching you 30 feet before his building does. The particular yeasty warmth of bread production meeting the cold stone air of the October morning. He nods. You nod. 2 streets later, you pass your first Gothic soldiers of the morning, 4 of them at a corner, large, armed in the easy posture of men who are not expecting trouble, but would be entirely comfortable with it. They do not look at you. You do not look at them. Everyone in your city has learned this particular choreography. The Curia is the same building it has always been, the same proportions, the same marble floor, worn smooth by the same centuries of feet, the same quality of autumn light coming through the upper windows, and falling in long angles across the tiered seating, where your class has arranged itself for 500 years. But there are differences now, small ones, the kind that accumulate at the edge of your perception. There is a secretary in the corner who is not Roman. His Latin is administrative rather than rhetorical, the grammar correct but unornamented, the voice of a man for whom Latin is a professional tool rather than a cultural inheritance. The agenda for today's session was drafted in Ravenna and distributed through Theodoric's court, rather than being constituted by the senators themselves, as it would have been in your father's time. There are 2 men in the gallery who have no official senatorial status, and whose presence nobody has formally acknowledged, and nobody has formally questioned. You know what they are. Everyone in this room knows what they are. The Senate proceeds with the particular discipline of an institution that has been performing its own importance for so long that the performance has become, through repetition, the thing itself. The administrative structure Theodoric maintained in Italy was, on the Roman side of the ledger, essentially complete. The same offices, the same ranks, the same cursus honorum that had organized senatorial careers since the Republic. Praetors were still appointed. Consuls were still named every year, their names still used to date official documents in the old fashion. The quaestorship, the first major office in the traditional sequence, remained the standard entry point for young men of your class entering formal public life. And Theodoric filled these offices deliberately, thoughtfully, with Roman aristocrats whose families had the education and the administrative expertise his government required. His chief instrument for managing this relationship was a man named Flavius Magnus Aurelius Cassiodorus Senator, a Roman aristocrat from Calabria, whose given names alone took up a significant portion of any formal document, who served as Theodoric's quaestor. Then his Magister Officiorum, producing in the process a collection of official government correspondence called the Variae, 12 books of letters, edicts, and administrative documents that constitute the most complete record of how a Gothic king ran a Roman province. Written in Latin prose so elaborate that later scholars would argue about whether Cassiodorus was showing off, or whether the Gothic court had simply decided that the more Roman the paperwork sounded, the more legitimate the operation would appear. Your own office, the appointment you currently hold, which has kept your family in the relevant administrative tier, without requiring anything so exposed as a consular nomination, involves the supervision of grain distribution records for your district. You are aware that this sounds unglamorous. It is, in the sense that all administrative work is unglamorous, repetitive, document-heavy, dependent on the accuracy of subordinates, whose accuracy you must verify without appearing to distrust them. Organized around numbers that mean something only when they are compared to other numbers that you have to find in other documents that are filed in other locations. What it gives you, which is not unglamorous at all, is access. Every significant family in your district comes through your records eventually. Their land holdings, their tax obligations, their estate productivity. And the knowledge of who produces what, knows what, and needs what is information that functions in the social economy of your class as a currency more flexible than coin. You know, things about your neighbors. Your neighbors know you know things. This is, more or less, what senatorial administration has always been. Last month you had dinner with a man named Probus. Not his full name, which is several names longer in the traditional manner, but the name he uses socially, in the abbreviated way your class uses with people they consider equals. He holds a position in Ravenna, in Cassiodorus's office, doing essentially what you do but at the scale of a province rather than a district. He had passed through Rome on court business, and had sent a message asking to meet, and you had met at your house, and you had eaten together and talked for 3 hours. What struck you was not the specific content of the conversation, administrative details, court gossip, the particular texture of serving a Gothic administration from the inside, but the quality of recognition. You were the same kind of person. His education had produced the same categories, the same reflexes, the same Latin instincts, the same reading list. You had never met before. You could have finished each other's sentences. This is what a system that has been training the same type of person for 5 centuries produces. A class with such homogeneous intellectual formation that 2 strangers can sit down and find they share a complete internal library. Theodoric, you reflected afterward, did not build this system. He just understood that it worked and decided to use it. The practical advantage of Roman aristocratic collaboration was not subtle. The families who engaged actively with Theodoric's appointments and maintained their presence in the civil administration continued to receive the same mix of honours and income that had sustained them under the empire. The consulship remained the prestige appointment. Cassiodorus documents at least 15 senatorial appointments to the consulship during Theodoric's reign. All of them Roman. All of them drawn from families whose names had been attached to the office for generations. The senatorial families who provided sons to the Gothic court administration as secretaries, advisors, and administrators maintained their connection to government spending, to tax exemptions, to the agricultural subsidies that meant the difference between a productive Italian estate and an unproductive one in a century, when the difference between those 2 things was not theoretical. The families that declined, that chose dignified withdrawal on principled grounds, found that dignity and agricultural subsidies were not, in the final accounting, interchangeable. Several of the proudest names from your father's generation are currently represented by men who are living quietly in the country, running their estates with some competence, and not being consulted about anything by anyone. You think about them sometimes. The specific skill your class provides is this: you can write a document that works. Not just a document in the sense of Latin words on papyrus. Anyone with a grammar school education can produce that. You can write a document that navigates the intersection of Roman legal tradition and Gothic administrative requirement, that cites the correct precedents, acknowledges the correct authorities, uses the specific formulaic phrases that the relevant court recognizes as markers of legitimacy. This sounds like a narrow skill. It is not. It is the difference between a boundary dispute that resolves in 6 months and one that costs your client 7 years of legal fees, and potentially their land. Theodoric's court, which is staffed by men who are administratively competent but not classically trained, requires a steady supply of documents that can move through Roman legal institutions without friction. Your education is the lubricant. You have been providing this service essentially since you took your first appointment, and the demand has not decreased. If anything, it has increased. The more Gothic officials there are who need to interact with Roman institutions, the more Roman administrators are needed to translate the requirements of one world into the language of another. Your office is a room off the main civil administration building near the Forum. Not grand, nothing your family would consider entertaining anyone in, but functional in the way that permanent institutional spaces become functional. The desk positioned to receive the morning light through the high window before the sun moves past it. The shelving accumulated over enough years to have developed its own organization system that only makes complete sense to you. The smell of the place, a layered combination of old papyrus, the cedar of the scroll cases, a particular dusty official smell of a room. where important documents have been produced for a long time by men who take them seriously. Your secretary sits at his own smaller table to your left, copying, checking, organising the correspondence that flows through this room in both directions. Your stylus case is on the right corner of your desk, where it has been for 6 years. You know where everything is without looking. The wax tablets for drafts, the papyrus for final versions, the sand for blotting, the small bronze weight that keeps your reference documents from rolling. These are the tools of your daily existence, as familiar to your hands as the handle of a cup. There are things you do not do in your office, and they are important to understand. You do not record opinions about Gothic military operations. You do not correspond with Constantinople on subjects that could be interpreted as political. You do not accept documentation from clients whose disputes are with Gothic military administrators. Those disputes go through Gothic channels, and you have declined 2 such clients this year, with the careful regret of a man who is explaining gravity rather than making a personal decision. The boundary between Roman civil administration and Gothic military administration is the most important invisible line in your professional life, and you have never in your career made even a preliminary motion toward crossing it. This is not cowardice, or not only cowardice. It is the specific prudence of a man who has watched what happens to the people who approach that line without the particular mix of official standing and political timing that would be required to survive the crossing. The boundary is maintained. The work within it is real. You stay on your side of it. Everyone in this building stays on their side of it. The arrangement holds, and will hold until it doesn't. Your walk home from the administration building takes you back through the forum in the late afternoon, when the light has gone golden, and the shadows of the columns have stretched long across the stone, and the forum has shifted from its midday business pitch to the lower traffic, lower volume quality of an institution, winding down for the day. You are tired in the specific way you are tired after administrative work, not physically exhausted, but mentally depleted. The kind of tiredness that comes from sustained precision, from maintaining the correct formulations and citations and tonal registers for 8 hours without error. You pass your baker on the way back, closed now, his doorway empty. You pass the Gothic soldiers, different ones from this morning, or possibly the same ones. You cannot tell from this distance, arranged at their corner with the same easy readiness. The city is going through its evening assembly, the cellars packing up, the taverns filling, the particular smell of Rome at the end of a working day that is cooking fires and exhaustion, and the faint sweetness of wine from the direction of 3 different establishments, simultaneously. You are, you think, exactly as necessary as you need to be. Not more, not less. The mathematics of it is clean. Your family has been necessary to successive governments for 500 years. You have extended the run by 17. You walk home. You have a letter to finish before bed. You go to your Campanian estate twice a year. Once in the spring, when the planting decisions need your authority to be final, and once in the autumn, when the harvest is in, and the numbers are ready, and your estate manager has been waiting for 3 months to present you with a report that he could have sent by courier, but that both of you understand functions better in person. The specific conversational accountability of 2 men, standing in front of the same field, with the same harvest record in hand. The road south from Rome takes you through country you have known since your father first brought you here as a child. The Appian Way's characteristic smell of stone dust and old dry grass, giving way, as you descend toward the coast, to something moister and more vegetable, the smell of good soil in a valley that is still warm even in October. The particular richness of farmland that has been producing food continuously for longer than your family has existed. Your estate begins at a stand of old plane trees on the right side of the road. 3 enormous specimens that have been marking your property boundary since before your grandfather's time. Their pale bark peeling in the way plane trees peel, enormous and permanent, seeming the kind of trees that make the human timescales of ownership feel temporarily modest. The fields in October have the specific smell of completed work, turned earth where the harvest stubble has been ploughed under, dry grass at the field edges where your men haven't cut yet. The mineral cold of the irrigation channels running low now that the main growing season is finished. Your estate manager, a freedman named Albinus, whose grandfather was a slave of your grandfather's, and whose family has been associated with this land longer than most free families in the area, walks you through the harvest numbers with the practiced cadence of a man who has delivered this report many times and has learned to present the disappointing figures after the good ones, and before the conclusions. The grain yield is down from last year. The oil yield is up. The wine is the same quality, possibly slightly better. The tenant obligations have been collected at 92%. The remaining 8% are the usual suspects. 3 families dealing with illness. 1 family dealing with a boundary dispute with your Gothic neighbour's portion that Albinus has been managing with the careful diplomacy of a man who understands that boundary disputes between Roman and Gothic property in this region now require considerably more care than they used to. You note this. You will handle it through your district contacts. You walk the upper field. The soil under your sandals is the heavy dark clay of good Campanian farmland, the kind that sticks to the leather and smells of everything that has grown here and died here and become soil again. The 1/3 land cession. The settlement that gave approximately 1/3 of Italy's agricultural estates to Theodoric's Gothic soldiers and their families was processed to the considerable credit of Theodoric's administration through existing Roman legal frameworks. There was no seizure, no confiscation in the raw sense. There was a system called the hospitalitas arrangement, originally developed in the late imperial period to billet troops on civilian property, which provided a legal structure for taking a portion of a landowner's property income and directing it to quartered soldiers. Theodoric's government adapted this framework to make the land transfer permanent and formal. Roman property law, with its centuries of developed precedent about how to document land ownership, was used to produce clear legal titles for Gothic settlers in their new portions. Roman surveyors measured the boundaries. Roman officials recorded the transfers. The Gothic soldiers received their land through a process that on the paperwork looked like any other Roman property transaction. The paperwork was correct. The land was still gone. 1/3 of your family's Italian holdings moved out of your family's ledger and into the ledger of a Gothic warrior whose family will farm it for the next several generations. Theodoric considered this fair. It was, perhaps, as fair as these things ever are. The day your Gothic neighbour, the man who received the adjacent portion of your Campanian estate under the cession, arrived to take possession, you were not here. You made that decision deliberately, the way you make most decisions that you have had enough time to make carefully. Your estate manager handled it. What Albinus told you afterward, the man arrived with his family. A wife, 4 children, 2 servants, and more livestock than your portion runs. He walked the boundary markers that Albinus showed him with the focused attention of a man who has been told something and is verifying it against what he sees. He disagreed with one marker, politely, in a specific polite way of someone who believes they are right and is taking the time to explain why. He was, it turned out, right. The marker had moved at some point in the previous decade, and the formal survey record was the authoritative document, which showed the boundary where the marker now stood and not where it had originally been. And your neighbour accepted this with the matter of fact equanimity of a man who fights for a living and has developed a pragmatic relationship with outcomes he cannot control. He built his farmhouse on a slight rise above the old orchard, the smoke from his family's hearth, visible from your villa's upper window every evening since. Your Gothic neighbour's name, which your Latin renders approximately as Radagast, a name that sounds to your trained ear like a sound effect, has become, over 5 years of adjacent property ownership, something closer to a working familiarity. He is a capable farmer, more capable than you expected, farming his portion with an efficiency that your father would have recognized as the specific competence of people who have had to do more with less for a long time. His crops are different from yours in emphasis. More meat animals, fewer specialized crops, less olive oil production, because Gothic culinary tradition has not yet fully committed to the Roman olive oil in everything model. His fields smell different from yours, more manure, applied more directly, less refined, more effective. He repaired his boundary irrigation channel last spring in a way that your Albinus has been quietly studying for professional reasons. You have had one conversation with him total, a year ago, when a cattle dispute was resolved in a way that required both principals to be physically present. He shook your hand in the Gothic fashion, which involves more forearm and more eye contact than you were prepared for. His Latin was serviceable. Your Gothic was non-existent. You managed. The economics of Italian senatorial landholding in the 490s were, by most measures, better than they should have been. The land cession had reduced your family's Italian holdings by roughly 1/3, the portion your grandfather would have found intolerable, and your father processed with the particular Roman resignation of a man who has already adjusted his expectations twice this decade. But Theodoric's tax policy was, from your class's perspective, reasonable to a degree that the late imperial period had not been. The extraordinary military levies that the last Western emperors had imposed to fund armies that were losing wars had ended. The base tax rate had stabilized. Your remaining 2/3 of Italian farmland was now producing income in a more predictable environment than it had in 30 years, which meant that the arithmetic of your net position, when you actually sat down with Albinus and ran the full accounting, was approximately the same as your father's had been before the session. Smaller portfolio, more stable returns, roughly equivalent lifestyle. Your class had absorbed a significant one, time loss, and had thereafter resumed approximately its previous economic velocity. This did not feel like a success. It also did not feel like ruin. It felt like the specific outcome you get when powerful institutions apply efficient force to your property, and you have just enough leverage to absorb the blow without falling. The walk through your remaining fields takes an hour at the pace Albinus keeps, which is an unhurried inspection pace, designed to show you everything you need to see without exhausting you. Because Albinus has been doing this for 20 years, and understands exactly how much physical labor a Roman senator can sustain before his attention degrades to the point where the walk stops being useful. You have walked these fields every autumn for 20 years. You know the feel of this soil underfoot, the way the clay packs in the lower quadrant near the old drainage ditch, the way the sandy upper terrace soil falls apart in your hand when you pick it up and rub it between your fingers, the mineral smell of it. You know which fields produce reliably and which ones require specific weather to do their best. You know the old stone wall along the eastern boundary that your great-grandfather built, and that has been requiring periodic maintenance since approximately the moment it was finished. You know the walnut tree at the corner of the third field that is enormous and old, and has been dropping walnuts on your family's heads in autumn, for as long as your family has been here to have walnuts dropped on their heads. The land knows you in the particular way land knows people who have been paying attention to it for a long time. Your tenants, the coloni who farm your land under the tenure arrangements, your grandfather established and your father maintained, and that you have, with minor adjustments, continued, are 53 families at present, down from 61 when your father took over the estate. The difference is a generation of the specific attrition that comes from families who cannot make their rent obligations moving on, dying, or being absorbed into the Gothic settler population, in ways that your formal records do not capture cleanly. The families that remain are the ones who have found a viable arrangement with your land and with your management, and you know them with the specific intimacy of a landlord who processes their problems. The widow in the lower field whose rent you reduced 2 years ago when her eldest son broke his leg in a ploughing accident. The family in the east quarter whose eldest daughter married a Gothic settler's son last spring in an arrangement that your estate manager described to you with the carefully neutral effect of a man reporting information, whose political valence he has decided not to take a position on. These are the people whose productivity generates your income, whose lives are entangled with your land in ways that predate your ownership of it and will outlast it. The broader picture of the Gothic land settlement, read across all of Italy, rather than from your single estate vantage, looks like this. The great senatorial families lost approximately 1/3 of their Italian holdings and continued. The smaller Italian landowners, the local gentry, the municipal elites who had been wealthy by provincial standards, but not by senatorial ones, had less cushion to absorb the same proportional loss, and felt it more. The Gothic settlers themselves, once established on their portion, adapted to Italian agriculture with a thoroughness that surprised Roman observers. Within a generation, Gothic farming families in Italy were producing Italian crops in Italian styles, had learned Italian agricultural techniques, and were in many cases indistinguishable from their Roman neighbours on purely agricultural grounds. The land had absorbed the settlers the way Campanian soil absorbs what you put in it, completely and without ceremony. What mattered now was not who had originally owned what, but who was currently farming it well, and the answer to that question across Italy was producing an agricultural landscape that looked, from the air, essentially continuous with what it had been 20 years earlier. The map had new names on it. The crops were the same. The wagon back to Rome leaves your estate in the early morning, while the mist is still in the valley and the plane trees at your boundary are grey shapes in the half, light, enormous and motionless in the still air. You sit inside the wagon with your accounting ledgers and your estate manager's written summary and the particular weight of a man who has been reminded for 2 days of everything his family owns, and therefore everything that can be lost. Your land recedes behind you, the fields, the villa, your Gothic neighbour's farmhouse with its morning smoke already rising, the stone wall your great-grandfather built that needs repointing again this spring. The road north runs straight, as Roman roads do, the engineering of a civilization that had strong opinions about the shortest distance between 2 points. You have the ledgers. The numbers are acceptable. Your family will be maintained for another year, and then another, or not, depending on what the next decade produces, which is a calculation you cannot complete with the information currently available to you. You hold the ledger, the wagon carries you north. Your land stays where it is, as it has always stayed, as it will stay long after whatever happens to you has finished happening. Your library is the room your father added to the house 30 years ago, converting what was then underused storage into the most characteristic room in your house, the most you. Your shelves are cedar, floor to ceiling on 3 walls, holding approximately 300 scroll cases in their fitted compartments, and another 120 codices stacked in their sections. And on the 4th wall, below the window, the reading desk where you have spent more hours of your adult life than anywhere else in this building. The room smells of cedar and old papyrus, and the olive oil you use to keep the papyrus flexible, and underneath those smells the faint accumulated scent of lamp smoke. Not unpleasant. The smell of a room where light has been kept burning late enough that the lamp runs dry at the residue. Your scroll cases are organised in the system you developed in your 20s, by subject, then by chronology, then by your own reading priority, which makes complete sense to you and would require 40 minutes of explanation to communicate to anyone else. This is not a flaw. This is the system working correctly. You have read most of what is on these shelves. Some of it you have read many times. The Cicero, the Virgil, the Livy, the legal commentaries, the texts on music theory that your colleague loaned you 4 years ago and that you had copied before returning. Your copies of the legal commentaries have marginalia going back 15 years. Brief notes, cross-references, and the occasional 3-word rebuttal to a point you disagree with, written in the compressed script of a man making a private argument with a dead author. Your copy of Virgil has a passage near the end of the Aeneid where your handwriting stops for several pages and resumes in a slightly different script. A period of winter when your hands cracked from the cold, and you worried about damaging the papyrus. These details are invisible to anyone else. To you, they are a record of your life inside this room, as complete as anything in your formal archives. The education that produced your ability to read and annotate these texts took approximately 12 years and cost your family a significant fraction of its household budget across that period. The curriculum was standardized across your class. Latin grammar first, with a grammaticus who drilled the ablative absolute and the indirect statement until they were reflexes rather than rules. Then rhetoric, studying Cicero's orations as both content and model, not merely what to argue, but how argumentation itself is structured. Then Roman law, the foundation of civil life, the 12 tables, the Praetorian Edict, 2 centuries of jurisprudential commentary. Greek was taught alongside this, not as a prestige language, but as an access language. The entire philosophical tradition of Plato and Aristotle existed only in Greek, and your class was expected to read it directly. What this curriculum produced at the end of 12 years was a man who could produce a legal document, make an oral argument in any register from formal oration to intimate persuasion, read the primary texts of Western intellectual history in 2 languages, and navigate any institutional environment his civilization had designed. The Gothic court, it turned out, had designed nothing. It had inherited everything yours built. The first time you explained Roman inheritance law to a Gothic military administrator, the dynamic in the room was the most clarifying professional experience of your career. A man of considerable physical authority sat across a desk from you and required information he could not access without your help. You had the information. He had the authority. Both of you understood the structure of this situation with the clarity that comes from having no social veneer thick enough to obscure it. You explained the relevant precedents. He listened. He asked a surprisingly good question, the kind that indicated he understood the mechanism and was testing the edge case. You answered it. He thanked you with the formality of someone for whom thanks is an official act. You walked home that evening, with the specific satisfaction of a man who has just demonstrated that his skills are load-bearing. Your education at that moment was not a cultural inheritance or a class marker. It was the reason you were in the room. The asymmetry that keeps your class functional in a Gothic-administered Italy is straightforward when stated plainly, which is why nobody states it plainly. Roman aristocrats provide a skill set: classical Latin drafting, Roman legal navigation, institutional administrative expertise that cannot be reproduced on any timeline useful to someone who needs it quickly. You cannot produce a classically trained Roman administrator from a Gothic soldier in less than 15 years, and even then only starting with a young child. The infrastructure of your class's usefulness is its irreproducibility. This means Theodoric's court does not maintain Roman senators out of sentiment or cultural affection. It maintains them because the alternative is an administrative system that cannot produce the documents Roman legal institutions require, which would cost more to replace than keeping your class intact. Theodoric understood this arithmetic precisely. His varii, the collected official correspondence drafted by Cassiodorus, are the documentary evidence of a Gothic king who knew exactly what he was purchasing and priced it accordingly. The purchase is ongoing. Both parties understand the terms. You have been corresponding for 2 years with a man whose letters arrive from Ravenna on good quality papyrus, seal pressed in court wax, written in Latin, so precise it reads as a mild rebuke to everything you yourself have produced in the preceding week. His name, in the full Roman form, is Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius, and the name alone should tell you something, because the Anici are the most consequential senatorial dynasty, still standing, centuries of consuls, landholdings, spanning multiple provinces, the kind of accumulated social capital that predates the empire itself. His letters arrive with the specific weight of correspondence from someone who has thought before writing. His last letter contained a comment on Cicero's rhetorical theory that you have been turning over in your mind for 3 months. Your reply is on your reading desk, in its 3rd draft. The first 2 drafts were not wrong. They were simply not as good as his letter deserved. Your stylus is next to the draft. You have been meaning to finish it since Tuesday. Boethius is, by any honest accounting, the most intellectually accomplished Roman of his generation, and possibly of the last several. He holds the position of Magister Officiorum, effectively chief of the royal household staff, in Theodoric's court at Ravenna, which means he runs the administrative nerve centre of the Gothic government, while simultaneously producing original works in mathematics, music theory, and Christian theology, and translating the complete works of Plato and Aristotle from Greek into Latin. The translation project is the one that matters most to you, the entire Greek philosophical corpus, rendered in Latin, because Boethius has read the same demographic data you have and reached the same conclusion, that the Western world is steadily losing the ability to read Greek, and that if the philosophical tradition is not transferred to Latin within the next generation, it will become inaccessible to everyone who is not educated in Constantinople. He is producing, essentially, a backup copy of Western philosophy. The fact that he is doing this while also running a government is the kind of biographical detail that makes you feel, in your most candid moments, that your own output is somewhat modest. The smell of your library in the evening is its most specific version. The cedar has warmed slightly from the hours of your presence. The papyrus carries its heated undertone, and the lamp smoke has built to a concentration that registers as a distinct layer in the room's air. You sit at your reading desk with Boethius's letter and your 3rd draft reply, and the particular quality of working on something difficult is in your hands. The wax slightly warm from the lamp's proximity, the stylus moving in the small, careful script you use for correspondence you expect to be read carefully. Outside this room, your house is doing its evening work. Your secretary finishing for the night, your cook cleaning in the kitchen below, the household settling into its nighttime sounds. In here the quiet is the productive kind. The quiet of a room that has been used for thinking for long enough that thinking is what it is for. The question that lives in the back of your mind, that you do not discuss, even in correspondence with Boethius, is about the infrastructure of everything in this room. Your library exists because imperial patronage and senatorial wealth have maintained the conditions for its existence for centuries. The scriptoria that copy texts, the schools that teach readers, the court establishments that fund scholars, the senatorial households that buy the products. All of that infrastructure was funded by the imperial fiscal system. The imperial fiscal system no longer operates in the West. Theodoric's government maintains aspects of it, but at reduced scale, with different priorities, and with no particular institutional commitment to classical Latin literary culture as a project worth funding for its own sake. What replaces the imperial patronage network, if anything replaces it, will determine whether the texts on these shelves can be reproduced when the current copies wear out. Papyrus does not last forever. Neither do the men who can read it. Neither does the money that pays for copying. The math on this, when you run it honestly, points in a direction you would prefer not to look at directly. You close the library for the night with the lamp turned low, not extinguished, because you have a habit of coming back once after you've decided to stop working, and the habit of relighting is more disruptive than the habit of a low flame. Your scroll cases are on their shelves in their system. Your legal commentaries are in their section. Your Cicero, your Virgil, your Livy are in their places at the near end of the top shelf, where they have been since your father arranged them, and where you have replaced them by hand, after reading, hundreds of times. Your reply to Boethius is on the desk, third draft, not finished. You look at the room for a moment in the way you look at it sometimes in the evening, as the accumulation of your family's intellectual life, stacked on cedar shelves in a room your father built, in a house your family has held for 5 generations, in a city that has outlasted every government that ever claimed to run it. The scrolls are on their shelves. Your reply can be finished tomorrow. You turn the lamp down and go to bed. It is now 523 AD 33. Years after the morning you began this in, and you have aged into the version of yourself that your younger self would have recognized but found slightly alarming. Your hair has gone grey in the way your father's did. At the temples first, then evenly. Without the dramatic patches some men get that make them look surprised by their own biology. Your children are adults. Your eldest son holds an appointment in the civil administration. Your daughter has been married for 12 years to a man from a family you knew before you knew him, which is the Roman aristocratic way of saying the marriage was well considered. Your house has been repaired twice in those 33 years and extended once, and the room you think of as most yours has moved from the tablinum to the library. Your morning routine is the same in structure, and different in the specific way that routines are different when the body performing them is older, slower, stiffer, with a 10-minute requirement upon waking before you can be usefully present for anything. Your city outside your window is still two-language, still Gothic, and Latin, still the particular morning sound of a place that has been adjusting to its new arrangement for 3 decades, and has mostly, by now, stopped finding it strange. The letter from Ravenna came in October. Your secretary brought it to you in the library, in the early afternoon, while you were working through a property review that required your full attention and which you therefore set aside immediately when you saw the court seal. The papyrus was good quality. The hand was Cassiodorus's office script, official correspondence, formal register. You read it standing, which you only do when the content is demanding enough that you cannot process it seated. What the letter described was this: Boethius, Anicius Manlius Severinus. Boethius, your correspondent of 12 years, the Magister Officiorum of Theodoric's court, the man translating Plato and Aristotle into Latin, while also running the Gothic government, had been arrested. The charge was treason. The specific allegation was that he had been corresponding with Constantinople against Theodoric's interests, that he had been, essentially, a Byzantine agent inside the Gothic court. You set the letter down on your reading desk. You sat down. Your property review was still on the desk where you had left it. The wax tablet surface was still warm from the afternoon light. You did not return to the property review that day. The political context for what happened to Boethius requires 30 years of prior history, and approximately 1 theological dispute to understand. Theodoric was Arian Christian, a version of Christianity that the Eastern Empire, under its Orthodox emperors, had been systematically suppressing since Nicaea. For most of Theodoric's reign, his religious difference was a manageable political complication, because the Eastern emperors were preoccupied enough with their own affairs to leave Italian Arianism alone. Then Justin I became Eastern Emperor in 518 AD, and decided that doctrinal unity was in fact a priority, and began persecuting Arian Christians in Constantinople, including Gothic Arians with connections to Theodoric's court. Theodoric, who had spent 30 years constructing a carefully balanced Romano Gothic administration in Italy, saw the floor beginning to move under his feet. His concern was not theological. His concern was that any Roman aristocrat with Byzantine connections was now a potential conduit for Eastern destabilization of his government. The Roman Senate, overwhelmingly orthodox in religion and culturally connected to Constantinople through centuries of correspondence and intermarriage, looked from a certain paranoid angle, like a fifth column. Boethius, with his superb Byzantine education, his scholarly prestige throughout the Mediterranean world, and his senior position inside the Gothic court itself, was both the most visible Roman in Italy and the most plausibly dangerous one. If you were Theodoric, aging, frightened, and looking for evidence of conspiracy, what Rome felt like after the arrest of Boethius was a specific kind of quiet, not the quiet of ordinary things proceeding normally, but the quiet of a class of people processing information they cannot discuss. Your dinner parties that autumn had the particular conversational quality of gatherings where everyone present has an opinion about the most important thing happening, and no one is prepared to say it aloud. The Senate sessions continued. Your colleagues appeared in their usual places in the tiered seating. The agenda proceeded through its ordinary item. What changed was the texture of conversation in the corridors before and after sessions. Shorter, more careful, with the specific tendency of men who have noticed that words have recently produced unexpected consequences. You stopped writing to Ravenna on any subjects that could be read by a sufficiently hostile reader as political commentary. Your colleague, who had been corresponding with a Byzantine scholar about a philosophical question, stopped that correspondence without announcing he had stopped it. Another colleague's son, who had been moving toward a court appointment, found reasons to delay. None of this was discussed. It did not need to be discussed. Your class has been navigating dangerous political environments for 500 years, and the first instinct, when the environment changes suddenly, is to reduce your visible surface area and wait for more information. While Boethius waited for his execution in a prison in Pavia, a process that took approximately a year, because Theodoric was not in a hurry, and the Gothic legal system was even less hurried than the Roman one. Boethius wrote a book. He called it The Consolation of Philosophy, and it is the most astonishing document produced by your class in a century, because it is a philosophical dialogue written by a man who has just lost everything: his freedom, his career, his fortune, and his imminent future, arguing through the figure of Lady Philosophy that fortune's gifts were never truly his to begin with. The premise of the consolation is that external things, wealth, status, political power, the accumulated honours of a senatorial career, are not actually goods in the philosophically serious sense, because fortune can remove them at any moment, and anything removable was never truly yours. What is yours is virtue, reason, and the orientation of your will toward genuine good. Boethius wrote this in prison, awaiting execution, in Latin prose, whose quality is better than most of what he produced when he was free. The book circulated in copies within a year of his death. You read it in your library in this room, in the lamplight, sitting at the desk, where his letters to you have sat for 12 years. It is one of the best things you have ever read. It does not make you feel better. The news of the execution arrived in the spring of 524 AD, carried through the usual senatorial network, reaching your house in the usual way, through a contact who had heard from someone who had been in Ravenna. You were in your atrium when you heard it, which is an accident of timing. You have never quite been able to make feel meaningful. The atrium smelled of the morning, of beeswax and old stone, and the first warmth of a spring day coming through the open roof. And your ancestral portrait busts were in their alcoves, as they always are, and the mosaic floor was in its geometric pattern, as it always has been. And the information reached you in the middle of all of this ordinary permanence, with the specific quality of information that changes the shape of things you thought you understood. Boethius was dead, executed, without a proper public trial, on charges that the senatorial class did not believe and could not contest. The most Roman man in Italy had been killed by the Gothic king he had served for a decade. You stood in your atrium for a moment in the spring morning, and then you went back to work, because there was nothing else to do. What followed in the next 2 years was the specific accelerating logic of a political situation that has started unwinding. Symmachus, Quintus Aurelius Memmius Symmachus, senator, scholar, Boethius's father, in law, the man who had raised him after his natural father's death, one of the most respected figures in Rome, was arrested on related charges and executed in 525 AD. Pope John I, whom Theodoric had sent to Constantinople on a diplomatic mission. He could not reasonably refuse, returned from that mission having accomplished less than Theodoric required, was placed under arrest, and died in Theodoric's custody in 526 AD. Then, 3 months after the Pope's death, Theodoric himself died. He had been in power for 33 years, and the last 2 of them had undone a significant portion of the 31 that preceded them. His successor was his 10-year-old grandson, with his daughter Amalasuntha as regent, and the Gothic court at Ravenna went from a consolidated power to a contested succession in the space of a summer. The Roman Senate's relief was too urgent to be dignified and too complicated to be cleaned. Theodoric had been, simultaneously, the best ruler they had experienced in living memory, and the man who had killed Boethius and Symmachus without a proper trial. The accounting of his legacy was not a calculation that resolved neatly. You go to your library and find a file of Boethius's letters, 12 years of correspondence, 24 letters, the papyrus in his own hand for the earlier ones, and in the hand of his secretary for the later ones, when his court duties had expanded past the point of writing everything personally. You take out the last letter he sent you before the arrest. You read it again, knowing what you know. It is about Cicero's rhetorical theory, the same question your unfinished reply was going to address. It is exact and specific and good, the work of a man entirely engaged with the intellectual problem in front of him, with no particular awareness that the problem in front of him was about to become irrelevant. Your unfinished reply is still on your desk, 3rd draft, stylus beside it. You have never finished it. You will not finish it now. You hold the letter in both hands, the papyrus cool and slightly rough against your palms, and you read it in the particular way you read things that you understand you will keep. The lesson your class drew from what happened to Boethius was not the lesson you might expect. It was not stop collaborating. The collaboration continued. Through the Regency, through Theodoric's successors, through the changing Gothic administrations of the next decade. The lesson was more specific and more uncomfortable. The ceiling on collaboration was lower than it had appeared. The most accomplished Roman in Italy had reached the ceiling and discovered it was load bearing. What this meant practically was this: visibility was now a variable to manage. The families that continued to do well were the ones who provided their services without making themselves personally indispensable to the Gothic court in ways that created resentment. Not the intellectual superstar who outshines the king's own secretaries. Not the senator who corresponds too enthusiastically with Constantinople. The administrator who does his job correctly, invisibly, without requiring the Gothic court to notice him enough to feel threatened by him. The collaboration had not ended. Its optimal operating altitude had simply been revised downward. That night your library is quiet in the way it is quiet when you have been in it for several hours without accomplishing anything. The lamp burning at its normal level, the scroll cases on their shelves, the letter in the file where you have returned it. Boethius wrote, in prison, that fortune's wheel turns regardless of what you have done to merit stability, that the wheel's turning is simply what the wheel does, and that the man who has understood this does not mourn when it turns against him, because he never mistook fortune's gifts for permanent possessions. You have read this argument. You understand the argument. You sit in your library with your family's 500 years of accumulated honours on the shelves around you, and your son's career ascending, and your Campanian estate producing, and your senatorial appointment maintained, and you try to feel the argument's conclusion. The lamp burns, the scroll cases are on their shelves. You have, for the moment, not yet been on fortune's wheel. The wheel does not ask for your opinion about this. The year is 527 AD, and you are 60 years old, and the specific quality of political weather has changed in a way that is not yet visible in any single fact, but that you can feel in the aggregate of small things, the way an experienced farmer feels rain before the sky shows it. Your house is the same house, the mosaic floor, the cedar library, the ancestral portrait busts in their alcoves, wearing their centuries with the mild indifference of stone. But your body has become the kind of body that knows what it knows and delivers that knowledge, in the morning as a list of specific grievances. Your wool mattress, which has been a satisfactory sleeping surface since before your father died, has recently developed opinions about your right shoulder. Your morning water is the same temperature. It has always been and hits your face with the same focused unpleasantness. But you stand over the basin longer than you used to, because standing over it requires less of you than the next thing will. Your slave has been attending you for 16 years and has learned with the specific tact of someone who has learned it the hard way that you need approximately 12 minutes of mourning before you can process a direct question. He does not ask you direct questions in the morning anymore. This is one of the better adaptations in your household. The court at Ravenna, under Amalasuntha's regency, still writes in classical Latin. Cassiodorus is still producing the correspondence. The Senate is still called. Your appointments are still processed through the same administrative channels as they were under Theodoric. But the quality of stability that Theodoric's long established authority produced, the sense of a court that knew what it wanted and had the power to get it, is not present in the same way. The letters from Ravenna have a slightly more anxious quality underneath their classical formality. The way someone's handwriting changes when they are writing with one eye on the door. Your contacts at court report that Amalasuntha is capable, intelligent, and thoroughly isolated. The Gothic nobles who served her father resent taking direction from a woman. Her son Athalaric is 10 years old, and already being worked on by the factions who want to steer his development in different directions. And the Roman senators she relies on as administrators are, from the Gothic nobles' perspective, exactly the problem. Too influential, too Roman, too reminiscent of the cultural project that Theodoric pursued to a degree. The warriors never entirely endorsed. Amalasuntha herself is worth understanding, because she is, in the narrow window of 526 to 534 AD, the last functioning version of Theodoric's political project. She had been raised at the Gothic court with a classical education, Latin, Greek, the full Roman rhetorical curriculum, trained deliberately by a father who understood that governing Italy required understanding what you were governing. She spoke 3 languages fluently, administered the regency through Cassiodorus's office, and maintained the basic structure of Roman, Gothic collaboration that had characterized her father's reign. What she could not maintain was the authority behind it. Theodoric had been a king who had personally killed his predecessor at a peace dinner. His authority was not primarily procedural. Amalasuntha's authority was procedural. Her right to govern derived from being her son's mother and her father's daughter, which was legally clear and practically vulnerable to anyone who questioned whether a woman's legal clarity entitled her to real power. The Gothic warrior nobles questioned this. They had opinions. The opinions were expressed through Athalaric. Your district's administrative work during the regency years is similar in structure to what it has always been, but the specific texture of doing it has changed in the way that all familiar activities change when the context around them becomes uncertain. The documents are the same documents. The legal citations are the same citations. The grain records, the boundary surveys, the estate assessments. All of this continues and requires the same expertise it has always required. What is different is the calculation attached to every action, not just what does this document accomplish, but who is currently reading these documents in Ravenna, and what are they looking for in them, and is there anything in this particular filing that could be read as a political statement by someone sufficiently motivated to find political statements in administrative records. This calculation was not absent under Theodoric. It was never absent, but it ran at a lower level of intensity. Under the regency, it runs louder. You have made 2 decisions in the last year to decline clients whose cases, while legally straightforward, would have required you to navigate a boundary between Gothic military property and Roman civil record that you would rather not navigate right now. Your other clients noticed you declined. They did not ask you why. The Athalaric education controversy was the specific moment when the fundamental contradiction in Theodoric's project became impossible to paper over. Theodoric had been educated in Constantinople at the Byzantine court as a diplomatic hostage between the ages of 7 and 17. 10 years of immersion in the most sophisticated Roman administrative culture in the world before he returned to his people and became the most effective Gothic military commander of his generation. He was, in his own person, the proof of concept. Gothic military power plus Roman administrative education produced a ruler capable of governing Italy. Amalasuntha applied this model to Athalaric. She gave him Roman tutors. She expected him to read Latin and absorb Roman rhetorical training and grow into the kind of educated ruler his grandfather had been. The Gothic noble faction, the men who had been Theodoric's military commanders, who remembered a time when Gothic identity and Roman identity were clearly distinguishable things, and who had been watching their king's court become steadily more Roman for 30 years, said, essentially, stop. The boy is a Gothic king. He should be raised as a warrior, not as a senator. They argued, with the particular conviction of men who believe they are defending cultural survival, that educating Athalaric in the Roman fashion would make him a weak king and a poor Gothic warrior, and a living symbol of everything wrong with the current direction of their people. Amalasuntha had them exiled. The controversy did not end. The correspondence from Ravenna this year is still from Cassiodorus, still in classical prose, still formally correct. But you have been reading Cassiodorus's Latin for 15 years, and you know his range. The letters you are receiving now occupy the register he uses when he is writing carefully around a topic, rather than addressing it. The register of a man who knows what cannot be said, and is saying everything adjacent to it with great precision. You know this register, because it is the one you use yourself. When a letter from the court discusses the grain administration of your district in unusual detail, at a time when grain administration is not the primary concern of anyone at court, the detail is not about grain. You read the grain administration discussion. You write back about grain administration. Both parties understand that the letter is about something else. The particular safety of an elaborate official correspondence style is that it provides everyone involved with a plausible record of having discussed only what the letter says it discusses. Cassiodorus did not invent this. He inherited it from 500 years of senatorial diplomatic correspondence. He is, in this sense, the most Roman man at the Gothic court, and also, increasingly, the loneliest. Your son holds an appointment in the civil administration of Rome, a middle-ranked position, solid, useful, the kind of appointment that provides access without exposure, which is exactly what you told him you wanted for him, and which he arranged with the mix of filial compliance and private irritation that characterizes his relationship with your advice, generally. He is 32 years old, and competent and cautious in the ways you have raised him to be cautious, which is to say in all the ways that Boethius was not cautious, because you have spent the 7 years since Boethius's death thinking very carefully about the specific risk profile of brilliance, combined with visibility, combined with Byzantine connections. And your son has none of these things, and this is not an accident. He has your family's education, he has your family's appointments, he has none of Boethius's irreplaceable genius, and consequently, none of Boethius's fatal indispensability. You have spent 30 years protecting a family line. You are now protecting it by ensuring that the next generation is extremely good at being unremarkable. There is something in this that your father would have found difficult. You have made your peace with it. The news of Athalaric's deterioration reaches you in stages across 533 and 534 AD. The way news of slow catastrophes always reaches you, through the layered network of clients and contacts and men. Who know? Men, each report slightly worse than the last. The boy king, who had been removed from Amalasuntha's careful tutelage and handed to Gothic warrior companions, had acquired their habits in every sense. He was drinking heavily by 15. He was governing nothing by 17. He died in the 5th of October 34 AD, at age 18, which is exactly what anyone paying attention had been expecting, and which was still, when it happened, a specific shock. The shock of a thing you predicted arriving on schedule. Amalasuntha elevated her cousin Theodahad as co-ruler to stabilize the succession. Theodahad was a Roman, educated Gothic nobleman who had spent the previous decade pursuing academic philosophy and running his estates at the expense of his administrative duties, a man more interested in Plato than in government, which had always seemed to you a more defensible set of priorities than Gothic court politics required. Amalasuntha apparently made the same misjudgment about him that everyone else made. He had her killed 6 months later, in the 5th of April 35 AD. The pattern of what happens to Gothic Italy's leadership in these years has a specific quality that your senatorial career has trained you to recognize. Acceleration. Political situations that are deteriorating can deteriorate slowly for a long time, and then very quickly for a short time. And then the situation is different. Theodoric's 33-year reign had been the slow phase, gradual, managed, sustained by a level of personal authority that his successors do not inherit. The regency, the Athalaric controversy, the succession crisis, Amalasuntha's murder, these are the fast phase. The fast phase, in your experience, typically ends not with a stabilization, but with an external event that resets the entire situation to a different baseline. You have been watching the East for 3 years. You know who is in Constantinople. His name is Justinian. He became emperor in 527 AD, and he has been conducting military campaigns to recover the old Western Roman territories. He took North Africa from the Vandals in 533 AD in a campaign that lasted 14 months. He has reasons to want Italy. He has a general named Belisarius. You have been watching. Your evening in late 535 AD is quiet, in the way your evenings have been quiet for most of your adult life. The lamp in the library, the household settling into its nighttime sounds. Your son in his own house, 2 streets away. Your city doing what your city does, in the dark. You are 68 years old, which in your world is old enough that you have started thinking about your tomb inscription, the carved marble outside the city walls, where your name and offices will join the names and offices of your ancestors. The formula is established. The stone can hold a great deal. You are still adding offices to it, which is either admirable continuity or stubborn habit, depending on who is asked. Outside your window, your city is a city that has survived Visigoths, Odoacer, Theodoric, 1 regency, 2 boy kings, and the systematic dissolution of the empire that used to organize it. You have lived through most of that list. You are, by any fair accounting, still here. The lamp burns on your desk. You go to sleep. Tomorrow, someone will tell you the war has begun. The first news arrives in late 535 AD through the normal channels. A contact at court, a letter forwarded from a contact at court, the usual network. But the information itself is not normal. Channel information. Belisarius, Justinian's general, the man who took North Africa from the Vandals in 14 months, has landed in Sicily with an imperial army. Sicily fell quickly. Belisarius moved north. Naples fell in the 5th of November 36 AD after a siege, the city taken by soldiers who came up through an aqueduct, which your city's administrators filed in the category of tactical ingenuity, and which your city's aqueduct engineers filed in the category of things to review urgently. The Gothic king Theodahad, who had murdered Amalasuntha and ruled Italy for approximately 15 months before his own army replaced him with Vitiges, spent the Naples siege period at his estate in Tuscany, conducting philosophical correspondence. His army's opinion of this management approach was expressed by removing him from power and then from life. Vitiges consolidated the Gothic forces and marched north to Ravenna to organize a defense. The road south of Rome, the road to Naples, the Appian Way, was now moving in both directions at once, and your city's morning sounds included, for the first time in your memory, the sound of people leaving. Your house on the Caelian Hill, in the 5th of December 36 AD, smells of what it always smells of, old stone and beeswax, and your cook's kitchen, and the particular cold of an Italian December coming through your windows with the morning. Outside, your city is doing something it has not done in living memory. It is welcoming a liberating army. Belisarius entered Rome through the Asinarian Gate on the 9th of December, 536 AD. The Gothic garrison that had been holding the city chose, with the pragmatic clarity of men who have assessed their situation accurately, not to fight. They left through the northern gate, while the Byzantine army came in through the southern one, which means that somewhere in the vicinity of your city, on that December morning, 2 armies passed close enough to wave. You were in your house. You watched from your upper window as the Byzantine troops moved through your neighborhood. Smaller men than the Goths, different equipment, speaking Greek and languages you could not identify, moving with a particular disciplined exhaustion of soldiers who have been marching for a long time and have stopped being impressed by cities. The Pope received Belisarius at the city gate with the full ceremonial welcome. The Senate sent a formal message of greeting. Rome, city of 1,000 years of political transitions, opened its gates and produced appropriate paperwork. The Byzantine reconquest of Italy was not, in Justinian's strategic vision, a negotiation. The legal premise was simple and absolute. The Western Empire had never legitimately ended, only temporarily lapsed in administration, and Justinian as Eastern Emperor was the rightful ruler of all Roman territory, including the territory currently occupied by Gothic kings who had never received proper imperial authorization. This was, from a strict Roman legal standpoint, arguably correct. The Western imperial insignia that Odoacer had sent to Constantinople in 476 AD had never been returned to anyone, which meant that the Western Empire existed in legal suspension rather than formal abolition, which meant that Justinian's claim to reconstitute it had a documentary basis that Roman lawyers could argue at length. They argued it at length. Justinian's war aim was the complete military reconquest of Italy and the restoration of direct imperial governance. Not a new Gothic Roman arrangement, not a negotiated settlement, but the old arrangement, with Constantinople in charge and the Gothic kingdom simply ended. For the Roman senatorial aristocracy watching from Rome, this was the political outcome they had told themselves they wanted for 60 years. It was not turning out to feel the way they had imagined. Vitiges besieged Rome from the 5th of March 37 AD to the 5th of March 38 AD, a full year of a city surrounded and blockaded, while Belisarius held it from the inside, with an army considerably smaller than the force attempting to starve it. Your house is inside the walls. You have never in 70 years of life lived through a siege, and you discover that the experience has a specific texture that no historical account had prepared you for. The food situation degrades gradually, and then quickly. Your household stores, which you had stocked sensibly, when the Gothic forces were assembling, are adequate for 3 months and insufficient for 12. You eat less. Your household eats less. Your cook, who is a woman of absolute professional integrity about quantities, presents you with honest accounting of what remains every fortnight, and the accounting produces, each time, a number that is lower than the previous one in a way that is not surprising, and is nevertheless shocking. The particular smell of a besieged city is something you will never be able to articulate fully. The reduced cooking smells, the absence of the market smells you have known all your life, the presence of horses in parts of the city where horses were not before, and underneath everything the smell of people under stress, which is its own distinct category of olfactory experience that your vocabulary was not designed to accommodate. The siege ended in the 5th of March 38 AD, when Byzantine reinforcements arrived and Vitiges withdrew north. The city had held. You had held. Your household had eaten less than it should have for 6 months and had managed, which is a summary that omits the specific daily texture of managing on less than you need, but accurately captures the outcome. Belisarius pursued the Gothic forces north. Ravenna fell in 540 AD. Vitiges was captured and sent to Constantinople. For approximately 14 months, from 540 to 541 AD, it was reasonable to believe that the war was ending, and that the Roman senatorial class was about to find out what direct Byzantine rule felt like. Then a Gothic nobleman named Totila reorganized the remaining Gothic forces and began winning battles, and the reasonable belief became unreasonable, and the war entered its second phase, which was longer and worse than the first. Totila's campaign across Italy in the 540s is the part of the Gothic War that is, from the perspective of your class, the actual disaster. He was an effective military commander with a specific political strategy. He promised freedom to slaves, offered land to peasants who would fight for him, and treated Italian populations who came under his control with a conspicuous restraint that Justinian's tax officials, who had been extracting Italy's economy to fund the ongoing campaign, had not matched. He also had a strategy for the Roman senatorial aristocracy that was more direct. In the territories he reconquered, he expelled the senators, not killed. Totila was not indiscriminate about killing, which was part of his political effectiveness, but removed. Landowners who had collaborated with the Byzantine administration were dispossessed and sent north, to areas still under Gothic control, away from their estates. Your family's Campanian property was in exactly this zone. Your estate manager Albinus sent you a message in 543 AD that contained, underneath its administrative language, the specific tone of a man reporting information he would prefer not to be reporting. You read it in your library. You noted the information. You did not go to Campania. Rome itself changed hands repeatedly in this period. Byzantine, then Gothic, then Byzantine again. And each transfer had a cost that was not immediately visible in the formal record, but that was legible in the physical state of your city. Not the grand damage of conquest, not the dramatic scarring of invasion, but the accumulated wear of a city that has been a military objective for years. The maintenance that has not happened, the repairs that have been deferred, the roads that have deteriorated, the population that has declined from approximately 50,000 at the beginning of the war to something your informed contacts estimated. In the mid-540s, at perhaps 20,000. Your neighborhood, which has been continuously inhabited since before Julius Caesar was a problem, has empty houses. Houses that were occupied by families you knew. The families are not all dead. Many are in the country, at their estates, or have gone to Constantinople, or have relocated to other Italian cities that were less contested. But the specific social fabric of your neighborhood, the particular layered web of clients and friends and colleagues, and familiar strangers that made this district feel like a place that knew itself, is thinned in a way that becomes more visible every month. The child who used to run through your alley for no particular reason does not appear there anymore. You do not know what happened to that child. The Gothic War, which began in 535 AD and will continue until 554 AD, 19 years of military operations on Italian soil, is the answer to a question your class had been asking implicitly for 60 years. What happens when the empire comes back? The answer, it turns out, is your property is contested military terrain. Your city is besieged and re-besieged. Your food supply is disrupted. Your tenants are courted by both sides. Your administrators are expelled by the side that resents your collaboration with the other side. And your city loses 2/3 of its population over 2 decades, while the infrastructure your family has been maintaining since before the Republic deteriorated to a condition that would have been unrecognizable to your grandfather. The empire, when it returned as a war. Rome had survived Odoacer. Rome had survived Theodoric. Rome had survived the Regency, and the succession crisis, and the slow institutional decay of 30 years of adjustment. What Rome had not previously survived in your lifetime was liberation. The accounting of what the Gothic War cost your class begins, as all accountings begin, with numbers, and the numbers are this. By 554 AD, when the last Gothic forces in Italy were finally defeated, and the pragmatic sanction of Justinian formally restored direct imperial rule, the Roman senatorial aristocracy that had governed itself, served successive governments, and maintained the institutional life of Rome for 500 years had been reduced, in terms of active functioning families in Italy, to approximately 1/3 of its pre-war size. This is not a dramatic single event. It is 20 years of accumulation. You add it up in the particular way you add up any long disaster, estate by estate, family by family, name by name, the specific individuals whose absence is first noticed, then confirmed, then filed under the category of permanent. Your family's Campanian estate was occupied by Tottila's forces from 543 to 549 AD, 6 years in which your estate manager Albinus managed the property under Gothic military presence, paying revenue upward in the direction that held military power, which during those years was not your direction. When Byzantine authority returned to Campania in 549 AD, Albinus sent you a message. The property existed. Your olive groves existed. 2 of your field worker families had left. 1 outbuilding had been converted to storage and never fully converted back. The drainage channel your Gothic neighbour had been promising to maintain had not been maintained. The numbers, when Albinus compiled them, showed a 6-year gap in your family's normal income pattern that was not recoverable. It was simply gone, the way 6 years is simply gone. The great transregional families, the Anasi, the Samaki, the Disi, the senatorial dynasties, whose names had organized Roman political life for centuries, did not survive the Gothic War as functioning institutions. This is the specific fact that separates the mid-6th century from everything that came before it. These families had weathered Odoacer, absorbed Theodoric, navigated the Regency, continued their appointments through the early war years. What they could not survive was the combination of 20 years of military disruption, Byzantine tax policy that treated Italy as a conquered territory to be extracted from rather than a province to be maintained, and the physical destruction and displacement of the extended networks, the clients, the tenants, the contacts, the men who know men. That constituted the actual operational infrastructure of senatorial power. A senatorial family's authority was not its individual members. It was the layered web of relationships those members sustained. When the web was disrupted for long enough, when the tenants left, when the clients found other patrons, when the administrative appointments stopped flowing, when the estate stopped producing, the thing that reassembled afterward was not the same thing. The name might continue, the legal entity might continue. What had made the name meaningful would not be there. Your street, in the summer of 549 AD, is quieter than it was in 535 AD. in a way that you can measure in your peripheral vision without counting. The occupied houses are a minority now, not a majority. The household 3 doors down, your Gothic neighbour from before the war, the man whose Latin you learned to hear without noticing, left during the Byzantine recapture of 538 AD, relocated to the Gothic-held north, and has not returned. His house has been empty for 11 years. It has the smell that empty houses in your city develop when nobody maintains them. The specific dry stone smell of a building breathing through its own decay. The faint organic richness of old wood going soft in the damp. The absence of cooking and habitation. That is its own sensory presence. Your baker is still in his doorway. He survived everything, as bakers tend to, because armies need bread even more than senators do, and the tactical value of a functional bakery exceeds its political identity. But the clients who used to fill your atrium on Senate mornings are reduced. Some of them are dead. Some of them left Rome during the sieges and have not come back. Some of them are still in the country, at their estates, or what remains of their estates, managing the slow recovery. Your atrium in the morning has the quality of a room designed for more people than are currently in it. The specific losses are harder to enumerate than the general losses, but they are the ones that matter. Cassiodorus, still alive, remarkably, now in his 70s, retired from court service in 537 AD. At the moment Belisarius entered Ravenna and the Gothic government dissolved, and went south to his family estate in Calabria, where he founded a monastery called Vivarium. He brought the books. This is the specific action that future historians will identify as the moment the classical Latin literary tradition was transferred from the aristocratic private library to the monastic institution. A man of your class, at the end of his political life, moving his scrolls from a senator's house to a scriptorium, where monks could copy them and preserve them, because the network of senatorial households that had formerly maintained classical texts as a byproduct of their educated existence was no longer sufficient to do the job. Your library is 300 scrolls. Cassiodorus's Vivarium was the beginning of the institutional answer to the question that had been forming in the back of your mind since Boethius died. Who copies the books when the men who used to pay for copying are gone? The answer, it turned out, was monks. The institution that absorbed your class's cultural function, as it absorbed several of your class's other functions, was the church. By 554 AD, the pragmatic sanction has restored imperial Roman law to Italy, which means that the legal status of properties that changed hands during 20 years of war is now subject to formal adjudication under Roman courts. The adjudication will take decades and will resolve some things and not others, and the families whose estates were occupied by Gothic forces will have cases, and the cases will proceed, and some of the estates will be returned, and some will not. And your family's Campanian property, which is back under your management, and has been producing at approximately 70% of its pre-war productivity, which Albinus considers an achievement, and which you consider a fact requiring close attention, is one of the more favourable outcomes. You know, families who have nothing left to adjudicate. You know, families where no one is left to adjudicate. You know, the names on their tombs outside the city walls, the inscriptions that end before they should end, the last office recorded, and then nothing. No son's name appended, no continuation of the formula, just the stone face going silent. These are the gaps in the record your class has been maintaining for 5 centuries. The record continues. The gaps are also the record. Here is who survived. Not all of them, not even most of them in the transregional sense, but the ones who made it through the Gothic War and arrived at 554 Ad Street ill-functioning, the regional landowners, predominantly. The families whose roots were in specific Italian soil, rather than spread across the imperial network. The men whose power came from being important in one place, rather than from being important everywhere. The provincial gentry, who had always been less glamorous than the great Roman dynasties, and who turned out to be considerably more durable. Your family falls into this category, which is not an accident. Your father made decisions in the 490s about which appointments to pursue and which to decline, about how much of the family's position to stake on imperial-scale politics versus district-level administration, that read, in retrospect, as prescient. They were not prescient. They were cautious. The distinction between prescience and caution is that caution is available to everyone, and prescience is not, which means that caution is the more useful trait to cultivate if you are trying to keep a family operational across multiple political transitions of uncertain duration. The institution that absorbed what your class could no longer sustain is the one that has been running parallel to your world for your entire life. Occupying the same city, drawing on the same educated personnel, maintaining its own libraries and its own correspondence networks and its own administrative infrastructure, the Church. This is not an accident of history, in the sense of something unforeseen. The Roman Church in the 5th and 6th centuries was staffed, predominantly by men from senatorial families, bishops and deacons and church administrators, whose educational formation was identical to yours, who read the same texts, wrote in the same Latin register, understood the same legal tradition. When the senatorial class's capacity to maintain its classical education institutions began to fail, when the wealth was reduced, when the network was disrupted, when the private libraries started having no one to fund their maintenance, the Church was positioned to absorb the function because it already had the people. Cassiodorus at Vivarium was not creating something new. He was formalizing a transfer that had been happening gradually for a generation. The specific careers your class's survivors pursued after 554 AD followed, with some variation, a small number of patterns. The first pattern, continued civil administration, now under direct Byzantine authority. The pragmatic sanction restored the imperial administrative structure, which meant that Roman aristocrats who could navigate Roman administrative procedure were still needed for exactly the same reasons Theodoric had needed them. The paperwork still required classical Latin, the legal system still required Roman jurisprudential training, and nobody had produced an alternative supply of men who had it. The second pattern, church service. Men from senatorial families entered episcopal careers at the same rate in the mid-6th century that they had entered secular administrative careers a generation earlier, because the Church offered the same combination of institutional stability, social status, and meaningful work that the civil service had formerly provided, plus the additional advantage of being significantly less likely to be disrupted by military campaigns than the secular administration had proven to be. The third pattern, for the families that had retreated to their estates, was simply farming. Not grand senatorial farming, not the managed agricultural enterprise of a family with 200 clients and a Ravenna appointment, but the older and more durable form of survival. Staying on the land, producing what the land produces, becoming less important in the ways that importance requires infrastructure, and more continuous in the ways that continuity only requires persistence. Your son, whose carefully unspectacular career you managed through the 520s and 530s, has continued along the administrative track through the war and into the post-war period. He is one of the men the Byzantine administration relied on during the pragmatic sanction adjudication process, which required someone with a thorough knowledge of pre-war Italian property law and the patience to apply it case by case for years, which is the specific combination of skills that his education had produced and that the current moment required. He does not make grand gestures. He does not correspond extensively with Constantinople on political subjects. He processes cases. His name appears in the records of the adjudication proceedings and in the Senate rolls and nowhere else, which is exactly the profile you designed for him, and which is, in the final accounting, still a functioning career and a maintained family and a son who comes to your house for dinner on Sundays and argues about property law with the calm assurance of a man who has been doing this long enough to be right most of the time. You find at your age that a son who comes to dinner and argues correctly about property law is one of the more satisfying outcomes the world has offered you. The classical library tradition, the text your family and families like yours have been copying and maintaining and annotating for 500 years, does not disappear after 554 AD. It migrates. From the private libraries of senatorial houses, it moves into the institutional libraries of monasteries and episcopal sees, copied by monks who were themselves trained in the classical tradition by teachers from your class, preserved in scriptoria funded by the Church's institutional wealth, rather than by senatorial personal wealth. The transfer is incomplete. Texts are lost, copies are not made in time. Papyrus that was already worn when the war began does not survive the chaos of the war years. But the core survives Cicero, Virgil, Livy, the legal commentaries, the philosophical tradition that Boethius was in the process of translating when he was killed. Boethius's own consolation of philosophy survives in many copies, more copies than almost any other text of his century, because it was read as both philosophical argument and personal testament by a generation that understood both the argument and the testament from the inside. Your copy is on your library shelf. You have read it 5 times. You still do not feel better. You continue to find it the best thing you have ever read. These two facts coexist. It is 554 AD. The Pragmatic Sanction is signed. The Gothic War is over in the way that long wars end, not with a moment but with an accumulation of moments that stop requiring your attention. And then one morning you realize the particular quality of anxious alertness you have been carrying for 19 years is no longer present. And the absence of it is the ending. You are old. You are in your house, which is on the Calian Hill, where your family has been for 5 generations. And the mosaic floor in your atrium is the same floor it has always been. Black and white tesserae in the geometric pattern that was fashionable in Hadrian's time, and is now simply old, simply yours, as much a part of your house's identity as the walls. Your morning water is cold from the cistern, as it has always been. Your slave, a different slave than any you have previously mentioned, because 60 years of household management involves a continuous succession of people you have known well, and whom time has replaced, brings your breakfast to the triclinium. The bread smells the way bread has always smelled in this house, which is the smell of your life, which is the smell of continuity, which is what you have been, whether you intended it or not. The city outside your window is not the city of your childhood. Rome in 554 AD has a population that your best estimate, based on the grain distribution records you have spent decades helping to manage, places somewhere between 30 and 50,000, down from 200,000 or more in the height of the empire, down from the 100,000 of your youth, down from 50,000 at the start of the Gothic War. The streets that were full in your childhood are not full now. The neighbourhoods that were dense with the particular Roman urban life you grew up in have gaps in them. Empty buildings where the maintenance has been deferred long enough that the buildings are becoming something else. Not ruins exactly, more like candidates for ruin. Standing and useful, but not maintained in the way that permanent institutions are maintained. The Forum is still there. The temples are still there. The columns are exactly where you left them 78 years ago. And the stone beneath your sandals, when you walk there, is the same stone worn, smoothed by the same centuries of feet. The city has not been destroyed. The city has been reduced, which is different from destruction, in the way that everything less dramatic than catastrophe is different from catastrophe, and which is in some ways more difficult to account for. The senatorial class, your class, the institution your family has belonged to and served and been defined by for 5 centuries, does not, by 554 AD, exist in its previous form. It exists in a form. There are senators still. Your son is one of them. The Senate meets in a reduced way in circumstances that would not have been recognizable as the Senate to your grandfather, which is perhaps the most concise way to say that continuity and change can occupy the same institution simultaneously without either cancelling the other out. The Roman administrative tradition continues in the civil service, in the church, in the legal system, that Justinian's corpus juris civilis has just finished codifying. The entire accumulated tradition of Roman law, organized and rationalized into a coherent legal code, published in Constantinople in a version that will serve as the foundation of European legal systems for the next 15 centuries. Your 500 years of legal tradition has been gathered, processed, and preserved in a form that will outlast everything else in your world by a margin that would astonish you if you knew it. You do not know it. You know that Justinian's lawyers have done good work. You know that the result is something you could argue competently. This is enough. Your 14 portrait busts are in their alcoves. The oldest, at the far left, has gone completely abstract with handling, the face worn into the idea of an ancestor rather than the specific man your many times grandfather once was. The newest, 4th from the right, was carved 8 years ago, your husband's father added to the series by your son's decision. The continuation of the family record that your ancestors began, and that you have maintained because maintaining it was what you did. You walk past them every morning as you have walked past them since you were 5 years old. The mosaic floor under your feet, the beeswax smell of the lamp your slave lit before you were properly awake, the creak of your house settling in the morning cold, the distant sound of your city assembling itself outside. These are the sensory constants of your life. The things that were true when your father was alive, and when Rome still had a Western emperor, and when the Goths were a story you heard from travellers, rather than a population with whom you shared your street, and your neighbourhood, and your alley, and your drain. Here is what you understand, at the end of all of this, that you did not understand when you were young, and watching your father's face in the tablinum, while the news of Odoacer's accession arrived by courier, from a contact near the Senate. The thing you are part of, the thing your family has been part of, the tradition of educated civil service that your class has maintained through 5 political transitions and 1 catastrophic war, was never identical to the empire. The empire was one version of the infrastructure that made your class necessary. It ended in 476 AD, more or less, depending on how you count. Your class did not end in 476 AD. It adapted. It served Odoacer's administration, and Theodoric's administration, and the regency governments. And after a great deal of disruption and significant losses, Justinian's restored administrations. It will serve whatever comes after that. What it is serving, always and fundamentally, is not a government. It is a tradition, the tradition of Roman law, Roman education, Roman administrative practice, Roman language, the accumulated institutional knowledge of a civilization that ran for 1,000 years, and that does not stop being true when it stops being politically dominant. Your class maintained that tradition. Your class was that tradition's delivery mechanism. You kept it running. The lamp in your library is burning at the end of another day, and your scrolls are on their shelves in their cedar cases, and your legal commentaries have their marginalia, and your Virgil has its passage, where your handwriting changes for a winter, and Boethius's letters are in their file, and your third draft reply is still on your desk, because you are never going to finish it, and you have made a kind of peace with this. Your house is quiet in its old evening, quiet, the accumulated quiet of 5 generations of people who did their work in this building, and then went to sleep in it, and in the morning got up and did their work again. Your city outside your window is smaller than it was, and still there, which is the specific achievement of something that has not been destroyed. The plane trees at your Campanian estate are still enormous, still peeling in the way plane trees peel, entirely unchanged by everything that has happened under and around them for the last 78 years. Your family's tomb inscription outside the city walls has more names on it, and you can read at a single standing, without squinting, which your eyes are no longer fully equal to. You have been, in the course of your life, a son, a student, a senator, a property manager, an administrator under 4 governments, a father, a widower, a survivor of sieges, a client of Gothic counts, a neighbour of Gothic settlers, a correspondent of the greatest Roman intellectual of your century, and an old man in a house that has been in your family since before the empire fell. You have kept your estate. You have kept your son's career. You have kept your library. You have not finished your letter to Boethius, who has been dead for 30 years, which is probably fine because the argument he made and the argument you were drafting a reply to are both, by now, academic. You have not finished because some arguments are worth maintaining as ongoing arguments, rather than resolved ones, which is a position you suspect Boethius would have approved. Outside your window, your city is doing its nighttime things. The sounds that have accompanied every evening of your adult life. The particular acoustic texture of a place that is smaller than it used to be and still entirely itself. The lamp burns. Your scrolls are on their shelves. Tomorrow your son will come to dinner and argue about property law. You have set the table for it. Rome is not what it was. Rome is what it is. These are not the same statement, and you have spent your whole life understanding that they were never meant to be.